Our first speaker this afternoon, our user speaker, is Rick Whitfield. He's the Vice President of Quality Operations at JHP Pharmaceuticals. Please welcome.
Thank you very much. I thought maybe I'd start this out by just telling you a little bit about my background and then telling you a bit about JHP, and then we can go from there. I probably don't fit in with this group. I'm a chemist by training, but that's physical chemistry, so when I was in graduate school that involved a lot of modeling and that type of thing, so it all does connect in time. So let me go on. I guess I can work this here, right? Yes. All right, so let me tell you about JHP. JHP is a small private pharmaceutical company. Our main focus is a manufacturer of sterile products. I'm going to teach a little bit about drug manufacturing today so you can understand where we're trying to go, so when you get home from the conference you can tell your family you know how to manufacture drugs now. What are the important data information to us? And again, we're on a focus to really be very proactive with our operations. The last session, there was a lot of talk about predicting things, not letting them happen, but understand your process so you understand when it's drifting, when it's going wrong, so it doesn't go wrong. So we're trying to build that kind of understanding into our processes. JHP, we have our own products. They're basically what's termed in the industry today as branded generics. So they're products that were approved by the FDA years ago. The patents have expired on them, but they're still finding their place in the market, but there can be generic competition to those products. There can be other manufacturers now that can come in and compete on those. In addition, we manufacture, we're a contract manufacturer. So we manufacture pharmaceutical products for a number of other pharmaceutical companies. Why do they have us do that? Usually that's a decision based on the technology platform. We may have certain technologies that they don't have in their facilities, so it makes sense as they're going through their development process to bring that to a firm like JHP. I guess the other comment I'll make is we're not unlike other businesses. At one time, pharma probably was unlike other businesses because it was a high return business. And in being a high return business, there was very little focus and emphasis put on manufacturing in terms of doing it smartly because you were making good money on it. So you put all your money into R&D, that type of thing. You wanted to, manufacturing wasn't an issue. We all hear a lot of discussion today around healthcare. Okay, the world is changing, and we're trying to become very prepared for that change. It's happening every day. So I bring up generic products. Okay, Pfizer this year lost their patent on Lipitor. That was the biggest pharmaceutical product that had ever existed. Okay. The folks in the industry admit today we're never going to see products like that again. The whole healthcare system has changed, so it's going to end up being a more competitive industry in time, and thus, if it's a more competitive industry, there's a lot more focus now put on the manufacturing operations and what is the unit cost of something that goes out our door. So, like other industries, we're focused on product quality. That's my fundamental job. And it's a job that I tell all the people in JHP, it's their fundamental job too. The product that goes out our door is injected into people. If we don't do it right and we miss something, we can kill people. So it's very, very important. It's not an ideology. We have to do that right. Obviously, as I said, we got to become more efficient. We got to start working smarter in our operation because there's competitors out there today. And then I want to comment on innovation. The pharmaceutical industry in the past was viewed, and probably justifiably so, as not a very innovative industry. And there's all kinds of excuses for that, and I'll touch on to those a little bit as we go along. Availability. Everybody today, I'm sure, has read in the newspaper at some place about a drug shortage, okay? There are massive drug shortages in the U.S. for pharmaceuticals today. Why is that? Again, because the focus on manufacturing hasn't been there, so the FDA is focusing on facilities and saying, you're not doing this the way you said you would. So a lot of facilities are out of business at the moment because of those issues. And again, I touched on the cost. As the industry changes, the unit cost is going to be much more of an emphasis than it ever has been. I like to talk about the pharmaceutical industry. We basically, at the end of the day, we produce two things. We produce the product, okay, and then we produce typically a stock of documentation that demonstrates the product is safe and efficacious, okay? And that's been the system in the industry. And that will always be the expectation that we have that data and information to support it. We're trying to get away from it being this stock of paper and approaching it in different ways as we go forward. You see on the slide there, it says regulated. Okay, I spend much of my time, myself or people on my staff, interacting with regulators. The FDA comes into my facility several times a year because I'm a high-risk manufacturer. I have European regulators in my facility. I have regulators from the Pacific Rim. Okay, it's a very, very scrutinized industry. Scrutiny like that, at the end of the day, can be twisted and made to be anti-innovation. Because when you want to do something, you don't have the freedom to just go do it. Okay, what you have to do is you have to somehow demonstrate, here's what I want to do, here's what it will achieve, and then there was a lot of talk earlier about change control. I got to take those changes to the regulators and have them agree to those changes before we can implement. So it's a complex system in terms of that. Now, the Food and Drug Administration in the U.S. has tried to take efforts over the last 5 to 10 years to change that environment to some extent. And there's a little bit different jargon that you'll hear in pharma, but really fits with the topic you're talking about here, okay? And that jargon you'll hear is PAT, and that stands for Process Analytical Technology. And it was just the evolution of a concept in the industry of moving away from testing product in laboratories and moving that analysis of product to manufacturing lines. And it wasn't well thought out, but then the dots got connected and said, if we can do that, what we can really do is focus and start to understand our processes better to make them more predictable, more reliable, and have less deviations in those processes. So our business challenges, okay, again, is to stay compliant. And that's a very hot topic. I said there's a lot of facilities today that are not having product go out the door because they have compliance issues. So they're spending their time on those issues. And then we're in an environment, fortunately, that creates for JHP. We're not having the compliance issues, so it creates the business opportunities. So we have real, honest-to-goodness growth opportunities because our competitors can't manufacture the product. So we want to make sure we're in a position to do that. So just a little bit about the balance that exists, the checks and balances that exist at a pharmaceutical company. Basically, we have operations and quality, okay? And the Rochester facility of JHP, that's our manufacturing facility. Basically, that facility is run by myself and my counterpart, who's the general manager and in charge of operations. And fortunately, the way we run that operation is my counterpart, He's a businessman, but he understands we have no business if we don't have quality and we don't have compliance. And I'm the quality guy, and I understand we don't have a job if we don't have product going out the door. So we work together to achieve that balance, and then we have a variety of support functions, engineering, ET, those types of things that are really helping us create the platform to move further along in the business and be successful. This is basically, I'm saying FDA influence, and again, I don't want to overemphasize this, but it is really part of the history in the industry. And there's sort of the deal now with the FDA that if you focus on your processes and you gather data and you change that data into information and you utilize that to demonstrate you understand your process and you utilize that information to improve your process, then some of that regulatory scrutiny that exists. So if I want to make a change, getting permission from the FDA has said, if you can demonstrate that to us, we'll step out of your way. Now, it's the federal government. We'll see if that happens, but that's the deal at the moment that we're going to try to achieve. And this is one of the reasons the FDA is pushing that. And if you probably don't pay a lot of attention to it, but if you look at the people at the top of the FDA and you see what they're saying at conferences about the industry, they're saying the pharmaceutical industry is caught back in the 50s and 60s in terms of their processes. They haven't improved them, and they're nowhere near a Six Sigma type operation. Okay, most estimates today, and this obviously, it's hard to paint a broad brush because you can look at certain aspects of the operation, they are Six Sigma. But if you integrate the whole thing, that's not true. And again, there hasn't been a motivation there to do it. And the FDA now is pointing out, you don't have predictable, reliable processes that are producing medicines for patients that are acceptable. So they're really pushing an advocate for change in the industry. And you see, you folks are probably more familiar with than I am where semiconductors and that type of thing are. So what I want to do is go through, actually in this next slide, and just tell you how a pharmaceutical is manufactured. And then I'm going to go through and say, okay, what kind of data and information are we trying to pull out of this process as we go forward, and how are we trying to utilize that? So I'm going to talk first off, this is theoretical, a pharmaceutical process, and then I'm going to give the examples of here's where JHP is today and where we started and why we started where we did and where we want to get to. But actually, the manufacture of a pharmaceutical, and again, I'm talking sterile injectables today, it's a relatively simple process that we've managed to make very, very complex, okay? But if you think about it, all we're doing is most of the time we're taking water, we're adding some type of what's called active substance to it. So that's called an active pharmaceutical ingredient, and we typically purchase that from some chemical manufacturer that has good quality control around the manufacture of that. Then we, in the bulk prep area there, what we do is we weigh out the material, we dump it into a tank, we mix it, we might check some things to make sure it's in solution. We typically will adjust the pH, and you got to have a certain pH so when a product's injected into your bloodstream, it doesn't hurt. So there's some realities to why things are done that way. You see it says prep under there, okay? Everything we do, what goes out the door, has to be sterile. What that means is there's no microbes in there that will grow. So we take great efforts in our process to make sure we're not contaminating it. So prep is the vials and stoppers and things like that we use in the final product. They all go through an independent sterilization process. So we get that into our area where we fill. Then we fill our product under aseptic conditions. What does that mean is we have HEPA-filtered air in all of our fill rooms. We monitor those environments. What are we monitoring for? We're monitoring to make sure we're maintaining a low particulate level, and there's industry standards on that. We're also monitoring those environments to make sure we don't have any microbes in that environment. So this is all going on as we're filling our product and bringing everything in to assemble the final product. Then after we get the liquid solution in a vial, we put a rubber stopper in it, we put an aluminum cap on it, crimp it, and make sure it's sealed properly so again those microbes don't get in once it's outside of our facility. Then we actually, prior to that, we sort of have two different manufacturing paths. One is, and it's probably 50-50. 50% of our products are the liquid. The other 50%, we get the liquid into the vial, and then because of the stability of the chemistry, we can't leave it in liquid form because it will only survive for a day or two. So what we do is we take that and we put it in a freeze dryer and we lyophilize it, and then that gets it into a solid form again. And when you get chemicals like that in a solid form, you have stability. And the freeze drying process is one of the trickiest and most critical processes in the manufacture of the pharmaceuticals. So, and I'll touch on it a bit later. After that, you get it out and you go on a typical packaging line. You put labels on it and put it in a final carton, et cetera, and into your shippers. So where we embarked on our path to really automate and collect the right type of data was on our freeze dryers. And again, what we needed there, you don't freeze dry all products the same. It's very unique to the product, what that cycle is, and that cycle involves pulling a vacuum, going down to a certain temperature, holding it at a temperature or ramping it, sometimes for a period of a week or so, and then returning the vacuum and capping and sealing. So it's a very, very unique and tricky process for each product. So initially, we get in where these recipes, we call them, we automate, and then they download to the freeze dryer. But then if you have cycles that are that long, you can have things happen during a 5, 6, 7, 8-day period. One of those things that happen is we get power blips that affect our ability to maintain vacuum, that type of thing. So that is information we collect from our freeze dryers, and today, right now, it's information that we're reactive to. So we have this type of situation, and then if we have something go wrong during our freeze drying cycle, we have the ability to evaluate that and determine is there any product quality impact on that. So I'm going to move along quickly here. So that gave us our base platform. And then once we had that, what we started looking at is saying, okay, that ability to collect and evaluate that data, that's much broader in our facility, or has much more value in our facility than just the freeze dryers. So I described very briefly our filling process, that type of thing. Well, to maintain cleanliness in rooms, what we do is monitor differential pressures. So you always have a cascade of rooms where your fill-in's your cleanest room, and you have air exiting that room to your next room. So you're constantly monitoring those types of pressures. You're monitoring temperature, you're monitoring relative humidity, et cetera. We monitor those things and we have limits on them. But what we're trying to build today is further down if we discover a product quality issue, and that's typically further downstream in terms of an after-the-fact testing in a laboratory. We now can go back and start to look at that data and say, is this quality blip relate it to a manufacturing blip we've seen, and we're beginning now to learn how to connect those dots and understand better control over our process. This is just an example of some of the data we're collecting, and I won't go into it in detail, but whoops, wrong button. But this is differential pressure, temperature, relative humidity, and when we see drifts going on, we can start to relate that more to product quality. I'm going to move along quickly here. Where we're going with this, okay, is we're building at least the fundamentals on the sensors. We're getting that data now into a system where we can analyze it and relate it to product quality. At the end of the day, we're going to find out there's some of this that is quite important to our product quality. There's other that we've collected this data all along, and frankly, it has no relevance to product quality. It was just a good idea at one time. So we're sort of trying to sort that out at this point. We're also, and again, just another example, all this is showing is, and I'll go to the next one, this is simply showing the number of vials coming out of filling line during a period of time. And you see where the green line there is. That's when the manufacturing was supposed to start, okay? But you see there was a long delay in actually starting the manufacturing. Well, what we're learning is we're looking at this data from a couple of different perspectives. Obviously, if I'm in charge of operations, I'm sitting there saying, I'm not productive during that time. What's going on? Okay? I'm sitting there in terms of a quality perspective and saying, we've done sanitation, a number of things like that to get ready to do this run. Now I have a long delay. Does that delay impact the quality of my product? So now, later on, when I'm testing the product, and if I see I got microbes in the product, that type of thing, I'm beginning to get to the point where I have a process understanding, and I understand why am I having this deviation. And then it tells me it's well worth it for me to support, whether it's training, machinery, whatever, to avoid these types of delays. And you see later on some of the variability in the number of counts over time. So we're trying to integrate all that together. The other place where we're going with this is, I said earlier, we produce two things. We have the product, and then we have that documentation to go along with the product. Okay? Today, that documentation is very, very manual. Okay? What we're trying to do is integrate our entire process, and that documentation will be what we refer to as an electronic batch record. Now, that involves two-step. Right now, our emphasis is very much around our manufacturing operation. But again, there's some archaic things in the pharmaceutical industry, so we have, independent of the operation, we have laboratories. Those laboratories test all our materials. They test our finished product. There's a requirement in the industry that you have to periodically demonstrate the shelf life of the product, that it hasn't changed, that type of thing. So we have all that activity going on, and there's some very traditional systems out there. Everybody's probably heard of a LIMS system that are used to manage and collect that type of information. What we want to do is bring that all together, and then we'll indeed have a final electronic batch record. And just real quick here, this mentions validate. This gets back to we're a regulated industry. No matter what we do, the FDA, the European regulators want us to go back and say, okay, now you have this in place, validate it, show that it performs reproducibly and it's robust. So that's a great deal of effort that's performed in the industry. And before they come out with the hook, I just want to make sure. I guess the challenges, we're along the path of implementing this. Our facility basically has two different manufacturing areas that have different controls, that type of thing. One of those areas, in the last year and a half, we've got all our sensors connected. We're collecting all the data. We're actually in the process of doing that in our second area now. And we're on the learning curve in terms of what does the data and information teach us and how will it help us improve the process. Our challenges is we can't stop business while we do these things. So we find times, we put it in a manufacturing schedule so we can get access and get our sensors in there. It mentions on there, implement in a somewhat hostile environment. This is an example on the slide here. That's what a typical operator is dressed like working in the facility. Again, that's all because of contamination of the products. We're not necessarily need to protect the people from the products. We got to protect the product from the people. Microbes come into facilities from people. So that's much of the focus. Any equipment we put into our area, it has to be able to undergo sanitation. So basically, you got to be able to slash bleach and other types of sanitants on the equipment, so so it's sterile when you're manufacturing. So it's a hostile environment to a lot of electronic devices. And again, it was mentioned earlier, and I guess I have to endorse it. One of our challenges is people. Okay, we're on a path of change. We're changing, frankly, I tell the folks all the time, to give us that edge in the industry and keep us in business and bring more business. But there's always a suspicion, as you change, how's it going to impact me? Is it going to make my job harder? Is it going to eliminate my job? And that's one of our challenges at times, is to keep reminding people that in the long run, this is a win for everyone. And with that, I'll stop. Thank you.